All right, you guys ready?
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Matt Stevens.
I'm Megan Cadron.
I'm Sarah Crisu. Nita Martinez.
I'm Julianne Carroll.
This afternoon, we're going to be talking about substance abuse and the related substance diagnoses in the DSM category. There are 11 different classes of substances, as you can see here. We're going to go through them and talk about them. I'm going to focus more on the ones you guys probably don't know as much about, but the ones you probably do know more about, like alcohol and caffeine, we'll kind of skip over. Alcohol-related disorders, I think most everyone's familiar with that. It's a central nervous system depressant. It is responsible for the most deaths of any other related substance on here. Amphetamine-related disorders are stimulants, oftentimes illegal in the form of methamphetamines or synthetic amphetamines. They can also be used with children with ADHD for Ritalin, Adderall, and things like that. Oddly enough, they create a paradoxical effect, so even though they're stimulants and the kid has attention deficit disorder, they can slow the body down. Caffeine-related disorders, I think we're all familiar with that. Cannabis-related disorders, anything related to the marijuana plant. THC is the most significant chemical, despite the fact that there are, I think, about 420 chemicals in cannabis. Cocaine-related disorders, cocaine is a unique stimulant, creating a euphoria of self-confidence, lasts about an hour and then creates the exact opposite of withdrawal effects. Hallucinogen-related disorders, LSD and ecstasy, though ecstasy has amphetamines in it, kind of straddles the line. Hallucinogens generally create auditory and visual hallucinations, but they are temporary with the drug. Inhalants are very brief high coming from a wide range of substances that you can probably find at just about any store. Nicotine-related disorders, cigarettes, I think we're pretty familiar with that. Opioid-related disorders are anything naturally occurring from the poppy plant, or they can be semi-synthetic in the case of heroin, or synthetics such as codeine and oxycodone. We're going to be talking a little bit more about opioid throughout our discussion. Phencyclidine is PCP, also known as angel dust. It is a very intense drug that can represent or simulate kind of a temporary insanity. It can also be in the form of ketamine, special K you've heard, like rave drugs and things like that. And the final category is sedative, hypnotic, and anxiolytic related disorders. They're all combined, even though they aim to do different things, they all have very similar effects on the body. The last one, polysubstance related disorder, is not a specific category so much as it is a diagnosis. In my experience, oftentimes it's a catch-all. Certain clinicians might use it as a catch-all if their client is using a variety of drugs, but it's very specific. It needs to be 3 different groups of substances, not including caffeine and nicotine, and without any one particular category predominating. Substance dependence is differentiated between substance abuse. Substance dependence requires tolerance and withdrawal. Tolerance is having to take more and more for the same desired effect, whereas withdrawal will be negative physical or psychological symptoms related to cutting down or stopping taking the drug. Substance abuse differentiates in that it's one or more of the following: potentially hazardous use, continuing to use despite negative consequences. Specifiers after diagnosing dependence or abuse can be with or without physiological dependence, various stages of remission depending upon how long it is since they use, or agonist therapy, which is antabuse, methadone, Suboxone, anything that is less bad, or medication related to stopping or tapering off the substance use. Or it can be in a controlled environment such as jail or a treatment program where they don't have access to substances. Prevalence, gender, and culture varies widely across the board between how cultures look at different substances. Certain substances are perfectly legal, whereas others are not. Highest prevalence is in the younger ages. It varies from drug to drug. Dependence can happen at any stage, but generally happens earlier in life with 20s, 30s, and 40s. With youth, it can kind of work together with conduct disorder. With the elderly, it can cause greater physical health problems, especially alcohol. Bodies aren't aren't good at processing alcohol. They get worse and worse as time goes on. So now I'm going to hand it over to Julianne.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it. All right, so we're going to use the case illustration of Elvis Presley to help demonstrate some of the, everything from assessment to diagnosis, all the way to a treatment plan. So hopefully everybody had a chance to read over the case, and actually we have a couple pieces of candy for anyone who might be willing to just raise their hand, and if you can throw out some information that you remember about the case that you read on Elvis Presley. Who is he? What do you know about him? What happened in the case? Anything, really.
Okay, so supposedly he and Priscilla shared a bed for 6 years, and she was allegedly a virgin when they got married.
Yes.
Shocking.
Yes.
You could just pass it around.
Okay.
He only had one sibling, his twin, who was born before he was and died at birth.
Excellent. Very true. Yes.
He was drafted into the army, and his mother refused to speak to him after he was drafted.
Excellent. Yeah. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in a little while and how it might have affected him. Yeah.
His mom was described as like very nervous, very depressive at times throughout her life, and used different substances herself to kind of calm her nerves, she would say.
Excellent. Yeah. So there might even be a hereditary case of substance abuse if you look back at his mom. Good.
I think he was like pretty attached to his mom, and then when she died, he had enough time with her.
Excellent. Yeah, you guys are hitting a lot of amazing points that we're going to elaborate on, including his attachment style and things that may have influenced the abuse. And I know many of you already know who Elvis Presley is just because he's such a famous figure. And, you know, at the height of his career, singing and having all these records available. But we just want to show you a really quick clip of what Elvis may have looked like before our team stepped in for treatment. It definitely is a good illustration of kind of what can happen with substance abuses occurring, and we're going to talk a little bit more about how our team would step in and maybe stop some of those things from happening. The first thing that we'll talk about is the treatment settings that we've put together and where exactly our treatment would start. In the case study, it mentioned a point that he went into the hospital for potentially a liver issue, although it may have been for detoxification. So we took this as a prime example to step in and work with him in the hospital ER. We are going to assume maybe defiance, not necessarily that he's ready to stop or that he even wants to stop substance abuse. And so we decided at that point to put him on a 72-hour hold in the hospital. Leading then to a residential drug treatment program, and then the last thing that we would recommend or work with Elvis on would be an outpatient or a home care treatment, and we'll talk about the details of those as we go forward. Okay. So as I mentioned, we are going to start treatment at the hospital setting with our social worker, and Matt again is going to talk a little bit more about what that role looks like.